1.3. So today we are doing, screw that up. So today's plan is I want to finish a little bit of terminology from the end of 1.2, and then we're going to talk about section 1.3. So I did get the question in the last class, are we going to learn how to solve differential equations? And yes, most of the class is learning how to solve differential equations, but the real power of differential equations is that you can work with them even if you don't actually know the solutions. You can still work with the differential equation. So the last bit of terminology that I wanted to remind you from last time was just to emphasize here, was to emphasize what I meant by, I'm going to give an example where I write down a general and then a particular solution. So just to make sure I've got this on video. So I think last time we were talking about general terminology with differential equations. I wrote down a homogeneous linear second order differential equation. So this is homogeneous. What does homogeneous mean? Yeah, the forcing term is nothing. Linear means what?
There's no, it's only all differential things are by themselves. It's like y squared or anything.
Yeah, it's like a polynomial, but where the powers are derivatives instead is a way to think about it. And second order?
Highest derivative was
2, right? So this is solved. So just to make this totally clear, when I write down y is equal to the cosine of 3x, this is a solution to the differential equation because if you calculate its derivatives, so minus 3 times the sine of 3x, and y double prime is minus 9 times the cosine of 3x. If you take these pieces of information that you get from the derivatives and plug them back up into the original equation, okay, so y double prime was minus 9 times the cosine of 3x. And then you add that to 9 times y. Well, y was the cosine of 3x. That's definitely equal to 0, right? So plugging that function in gives you a true equation, and that's what we mean by saying that this is a solution to the differential equation. However, it is not every solution to the differential equation. So I'm going to make the following claim, which you can verify. Y is equal to C1 times the cosine of 3x plus C2 times the sine of 3x is the general solution to, okay, so I'm going to write DE here. It's annoying to write differential equation over and over again, so DE, capital letters, is the standard abbreviation for differential equation. So if I write that, that's what I mean. So I mean two things when I say that a function is a general solution. The first thing is that if you calculated the derivatives of this function and plugged them into the original equation, it would be a solution. Anything of that form is a solution for any constant C1 and C2. All of them are. That's easy to show. What's harder to show is that is every solution to that differential equation. Every solution to this differential equation can be written in that form. And that's a way bigger claim, and not something that we have the ability to prove right now. If you want to get an idea of what the relationship is between the general solution and the original equation, for a linear equation, the order of the equation tells you how many solutions there should be. So if I give you a quadratic polynomial and I ask you how many roots does it have, the answer is 2, right? If you have a parabola, you factor it, you tell you what the roots are. They might be complex, but there's 2 roots to a quadratic, right? A cubic has 3. In the same way, a second order equation is going to have a solution that has 2 pieces. Third order will have 3 pieces, and so on. So the number of constants is related to the order of the equation. We will see this all the way, I think in chapter 7 is where we'll get this nailed down. So by a general solution, I mean every solution to y prime prime plus 9y is equal to 0 has that form. Now, there may be circumstances where I give you more information. So I could also give you an initial condition or a set of initial conditions. And if I give you initial conditions, what I create is something called an initial value problem, an IVP. Initial value problem. So in a particular physical instance, I might say, hey, I've got this thing that's modeled by the equation y prime prime plus 9y is equal to 0, and also y of 0 is equal to 1 and y prime of 0 is equal to 1. Two pieces of information because I was working with two unknowns. And in that case, I can write down what's called a particular solution. I pointed out last time the word particular here is a term of art that means a specific solution to the problem. So if I write down y prime prime plus 9y is equal to 0, and y of 0 is equal to 1, and y prime of 0 is equal to 1, I've given you a differential equation and some initial conditions, and you somehow came up with the general solution, hopefully by a method more sophisticated than guessing, or because your professor told you so. Then you could actually nail down the specific C1 and C2. In the same way when we did antiderivatives, that you could tell me the plus C if I give you one additional piece of information. The same thing will happen here. If I give you more information, you can solve for C1 and C2. So y of 0 would be C1 times the cosine of 0 plus C2 times the sine of 0, which is equal to C1. But if y of 0 is also supposed to be equal to 1, then that means that C1 is equal to 1. If I took a derivative of this solution to the differential equation, y prime is minus 3c1 sine of 3x plus 3c2 times the cosine of 3x. And then the reason to take the derivative is because these are differential equations. I gave you information about the derivative. If you plug that condition in, y prime of 0 will turn out to be 3c2. Oh, but y prime of 0 was supposed to be equal to 1, and that means that c2 must have been equal to 1/3. And that lets us pass from the general solution, which is all possible solutions to the differential equation, to what is called a particular solution, the specific one that meets those conditions. So y is equal to cosine of 3x plus 1/3 of the sine of 3x is a particular solution. So by particular, I just mean specific. It met some sort of conditions. Okay. So if there's no more questions about section 1.2, this is basically the end of the terminology of 1.2. I know it's weird to be learning math backwards where we're giving you all these equations and we're studying them, but we're not going to learn how to solve them. Like the solutions we'll start on Friday, we'll start learning how to solve these things. Okay. This particular one we won't see until like week 8. Alright. So I'm good to erase this? Okay. So let's look at 1.3. So section 1.3 is about the geometry of first order equations. Okay, so the whole point of this is that I can study what's going on in a physical process even if I don't know what the solution to the equation is. So the reason you can do that is if you wrote down an expression for a first order equation of the form dy dx is equal to some function of f of x and y. As an example here, you can imagine, this is going to be one we're going to be looking at, dy dx is equal to 3x. Or dy dx is equal to x plus y. These are statements about the derivatives of some function, even if you don't know the function. Dy dx is a slope. So if y is a function of x, implicitly, maybe back in the day when you learned implicit differentiation, you weren't sure why you learned it. This is what implicit derivatives are for. Implicit derivatives are going to give us a way of studying the slopes of functions, even if I don't know what the functions are. I might not know the solution, the actual equation that solves one of these equations, but I can still tell you about the derivatives. So, first order equations are interpreted. So a first order differential equation is an assertion about slopes. So let's take a look at a concrete example first, and I'll try to connect these things together. So if I gave you this equation, y prime is equal to 3x. That one is actually pretty easy to solve, right? Like, what's y equal to? Like, if you want to solve that differential equation, what's the explicit function that does it?
3 over 2x squared.
Yeah, y is 3/2 of x squared. Well, I'm going to need the arbitrary constant.
Plus c.
And if I wanted to, I could plot a family of those things, right? So I could say, all right, well, 3/2 x plus c is a family of parabolas. They open upward. The c value is going to dictate the heights. So there's going to be some family of parabolas that look like this. There'll be one when c is equal to -1. There'll be one when c equals +1, and so on. That is the family of solutions. So we call these pictures solution curves. So you can think of solution curves are the graphs of the possible solutions. Especially if I don't tell you an initial condition, I'm studying the differential equation as a whole by drawing a bunch of pictures of what the solution curves would look like. Different initial conditions get me on different curves. If I didn't know what the solution to that differential equation was, I can still come up with a way of constructing something like that picture. So imagine instead we had y prime is equal to 3x, and I didn't know the solution. The point is, if I thought about that as an implicit derivative, I could still generate the slopes. So if I fed that equation the point 0, 0, hey, at the point 0, 0, if a solution happened to pass through the point 0, 0, what would the slope of that thing be?
0.
0. Why? Because y prime at 0, 0 is 3 times 0, which is 0. At that point, the slope is 0. In fact, at every point with x is equal to 0, the slope is equal to 0. Right? I'm evaluating the function for slopes in terms of the points, making the assumption that if a curve happened to pass through that point, and there will be a curve that passes through each of these, then its slope at that point must be 0, because that's what the rule about the derivative says. What if I had this set of points? What if I picked 1, 0?
The slope would be 3.
Yeah, so here, y prime is equal to 3 times 1, which is 3. 3 is pretty steep. How about, that's the same color. Yeah, so minus 1, 0, y prime will be equal to 3 times -1, which is -3. -3, -3, -3, -3, and so on. What's up?
No. I'm talking about, I did slope fields and this stuff in AB, and I'm pretty sure my professor, I don't know if it was part of the curriculum. So I was just...
Yeah. I mean, it's all over the place. Sometimes it's in, sometimes it isn't.
Yeah.
Like people, there's going to be people in here that have derived the logistic equation from scratch, right? So, so generally, no, it's not actually part of the AP curriculum, which is kind of funny. Okay, so the idea is that the solution to the differential equations, even if you can't solve the differential equation, you can pick off what it must look like, because you can sort of imagine if you were at this point and you went this way, well, every line that you drew, the slopes are getting progressively steeper on this side, which means your solution curves look like this. The slopes as they pass through those points match the slopes of the slope field. So even if you don't actually know that the solutions are parabolas, and generally you won't, you can still infer from the slope field what the solutions must be doing. Now I will tell you that this way of generating slope, this thing right here that we've drawn is called a slope field. And this is about the worst possible way to draw it. Like, picking individual dots and plugging them into a function and drawing plots like this is awful and not a sophisticated mathematical way of doing it. So we're going to take a different approach, which is called the method of isoclines. So a better way of drawing this would be, what if instead I found all the values that had the same slope? It would be much easier to draw than just evaluating single points over and over again. Maybe instead what I'd like to do is figure out, if y prime is equal to 3x, and if 3x was constantly equal to, say, 0, then x would be equal to 0. And that would imply...
What was this called?
I'm gonna get to it, right? So x is equal to 0, but that would say that on the line x is equal to 0, y prime, which is equal to 3x, which was constantly equal to 0, would say on the line x is equal to 0, the slopes were constantly equal to 0. A line where the slope field is constant is called an isocline. It just means same slope. And I don't know about you, but drawing that and saying, hey, look, that's the line on which all the slopes are 0 is way faster than plugging in single points and evaluating. Right? This is like the sort of brain dead way of doing this. Isoclines are the way that like computers do it, for example. If I wanted the line where all the slopes were equal to 1, okay, so maybe all the slopes are equal to 3. That would make it easier. Hey, what's the line on which all the slopes are equal to 3? Well, the only way that could happen would be if 3x was equal to 3, which would mean x is equal to 1. So the isocline x is equal to 1 is the line on which the derivatives were all equal to 3. 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and so on. So now let's do a more interesting example here. First, questions about this. The idea is we are studying the structure of the derivatives of the functions by looking at the level curves of the differential equation, essentially. All right. So let's take a look at something more interesting. Not that much more interesting, but a little bit more interesting. So if I give you y prime is equal to x plus y, and you can imagine this would be quite a bit more obnoxious to work with because, I don't know, I mean, to get a reasonable idea of what's going on with a differential equation, you need dozens of points where you evaluate the slope. And I don't want to plug stuff in to do it. I'm going to draw isoclines. So I'm going to start by picking the isocline where y prime is constantly equal to 0. I want the line on which the slopes are all 0. That's going to be x plus y is constantly equal to 0, which means y had better be equal to negative x. If y is equal to minus x, then x plus y is always equal to 0, and that means the slope will always be equal to 0. So on the line y equals minus x, we have slope constantly equal to 0. On the line, let's see, so if y prime is going to constantly be equal to 1, then that would mean that x plus y should be equal to 1, which means y is equal to minus x plus 1. Minus x plus 1 looks like this. On that line, this is the isocline that goes with all slopes 1. This will turn out to be the isocline that goes with all slopes 2. those are twos, just not straight vertical. It's all 2. There we go. On the other side, okay, you got this weird one. Y prime is equal to -1. That'll be the same as -1 is equal to x plus y, which is y is equal to -x minus 1. The weird thing here is that the line is parallel to the flow of the vector of these slopes, right? If you're in that line, your rate of change keeps you in the line. Because on that particular line, aren't all the slopes -1? And if you come out the other side, this will be the line where the slopes are -2. So this is the isocline method for drawing a slope field. Now the question is, what the heck do the solutions look like? So this is where I can test your intuition for what's actually happening here. So if I've done this correctly, that particular slope field that I've drawn should show up here. Maybe. Old Cal Poly, new Cal Poly. Okay, hard to see.
Wait, for k equals, are the slope equal to -2?
It's y is equal to -x minus 2, which is like -x minus 2.
So the slope on that one is -2.
-2s on this line, yeah. So this is the y prime is equal to -2 line. This is the y prime is equal to -1. This is y prime is 0. Y prime is 1, and y prime is 2. So,
okay.
I know it's hard to see because of the contrast on this thing. This is what most people work with when they're working with differential equations and slope fields. You never calculate these things by hand. So, the software that I use to generate this is called MATLAB. It's not a required component of the course, but it is free to you. There's a really nice tool for MATLAB for studying differential equations, which will be important for the next week and at the end of the class, called D-Field, which is what I'm using to do this. If you are interested in learning how to visualize these things, and you want to learn MATLAB, industry standard language, by the way, and you can put it on your CV if you know how to work with it, and many of you will just learn how to do this, you could get started now. I've got a lot of support available for people who want to do this. That is the slope field. You can see that here is the line y is equal to -x. And then as we go out this way, it's harder to see that we've got those lines of constant slope, but they're in there. The isoclines are in there. So now, this particular one, if I click any dot inside that graph, it will draw me the solution curve that goes through that graph. So my question is, before I do that, if I picked a point that was right here, what does the solution curve do?
It just kind of falls because.
Hold on, I see all kinds of people doing this. Like, Aiden, what does it do? Okay, zoop. All right. So yeah, I see a lot of zoops going on here, right? So then my question is, there's 2 possible zoops this thing could do. In this direction, it's pretty clear what should happen, which is it goes down, it has flat curve here, and then goes up forever in this direction. What does it do over here?
Goes
Asymptote.
like
Is it
asymptotes, but kind of goes in the negative direction because it's how it curves.
Okay. So this turns out to be this, like, so the guess here is this is an asymptote, right? That as you approach this thing, you can't go through it. So then my question would be, what if I put one over here? What should it look like?
I don't know based off how you.
I'm on the other side of the asymptote. Okay, I see other zooping happening.
But like down. Never mind.
Am I gonna be down here? Like, where should I put my hand here?
Yeah, it'll go like down there.
Asymptote up the top.
From the asymptote,
And it'll just
Wait,
exponentially.
yeah.
like that. So it comes in along the asymptote and then dives away.
I was,
Okay, or it comes in along the asymptote and then goes like this. Well, let's populate this thing with some pictures and see.
Yeah, there we go.
Pretty good, right? So what we're looking at here is a picture where if I'm close to the asymptote, I will ride the asymptote. If I'm on one side, I curve away to minus infinity. If I'm on the other side, I curve up to positive infinity. So this kind of analysis is what people that work with differential equations actually do. You come up with a differential equation, you hardly ever have the ability to, I didn't notice, at no point did I tell you what the solution to this differential equation was. We're working entirely in terms of the differential equation itself without any reference to the family of functions that produces this. I mean, you could look at that and think, that should be pretty complicated, actually. The family of functions that's making this happen is got to be pretty complicated if they change behavior like that across this asymptote. So we will learn how to solve this. Actually, this specific one, we will learn how to solve in chapter 1.4, which we'll start tomorrow.
So if you go to like infinity all the way to the negative x, do they all kind of originate from?
Yeah. So if you actually, this is a good question. So this is a backwards. This in the field, this would be called a backwards time analysis. And so if I go to my little software here and I make this let's start at -40. And then I guess I should put this at +40 here. And you can see that if you click on these things, that these are backwards stable, right?
Slanted asymptote.
Yeah, so you have a slant asymptote. So here's one of the things I was going to point out later. If you are an engineer of any kind and you were cooking up this example and you wrote down that differential equation and you were studying this problem and you accidentally only studied that part of the domain, you would think that your systems were stable. If this was time, look, they're all just sitting on that line. Things must be stable, right? And then as you get further out in time and everything explodes, this is actually an unstable system, but you have to be careful in the analysis. So like there are at least 3 classes that come after this one, depending on your major, that do, okay, well, we got our basic tool set. How do we analyze more complicated equations? Where do they come from? And how do I avoid this if I'm working in some sort of physical system? All right.
Wait, why does it? Should it not continue? Does the asymptote?
You mean like what happened here?
Does the asymptote not continue? Does
It does.
The same throughout the whole thing?
The asymptote is actually just runs like down here forever, but I'm generating numerical solutions that started over here. So if I started initial points out here somewhere, we would still pick up the asymptote.
Oh.
All right, I have a different model to show you, which I think is one of the most important, and it's an example of a type of equation called an autonomous equation. So let's look at a different model. So we're going to look at y prime is equal to minus y times 100, or sorry, y times 100 minus y. So this equation is of a type that's called autonomous. I know this class is full of terminology. What the word autonomous means is that there's no x. In some fields, these are called time independent. So, what this equation is telling us, well, let's just actually draw some isoplines here. Some pretty easy ones. Can you tell me where the slope of that thing is always equal to 0?
100 and 0?
Sure. Y prime will be equal to 0 when y times 100 minus y is equal to 0. And that happens when y is 0 or y is equal to 100. Y is 100. Y is equal to 0. These are curves on which y prime is nothing. Okay, now my question is, if you started in one of those curves, can you ever leave it?
Like above or
No, in it.
No.
If you were in one of these curves, can you get out? If I'm at this point right here, do I go up or down or neither? Imagine I'm sliding to the right. Neither. I'm stuck. Because I slide forward a little bit. Can I leave? No. I'm trapped in this forever. So these are called equilibrium solutions. If the rate of change is constantly 0, nothing ever changes and things are in equilibrium. Now I'm just going to plot this one because I think that we're going to try to figure out what's going on with the analysis of it in a second. So minus y, not minus y, y. Oh yeah, that's nice and loud, times 100 minus y. And we'll do it from... Oh, I guess I better have my y values include like 400 or something, right? 100, I put 200 right here. What is happening? Hold on. Let's double check and see if I got my solutions correct here. Oh, I know. Let's put a minus 100 down here. Okay, now the slope field is not very illustrative, but if I start clicking on this thing, you should actually start seeing where the equilibrium lines are, right? That's the line y equals 0. Here we have the line where, I could just minimize the x domain to make this more illustrative. 1 second, 0 to say 2. There we go. So if I start plotting things in here, you see these weird lines that go between these guys. So if I click outside here, any point that's below that lower asymptote, the slope field is basically telling you if you're down here, you're being sent this way, away from the asymptote. If you're between the asymptotes, so if you're above this asymptote, then you're being pushed up, but then you're trapped by this one. And if you're above the top one, you're being sucked into it. So this example, now I'm just going to tell you like what the name of this is. How many of you guys have seen the logistic model before? You would have learned this around the same time you learned about exponential growth, right? Exponential growth is, if you've seen exponential growth, you've seen the equation y prime is equal to y, or cy, or say a 2y or something. What that would say is, oh, the rate of change of your population is double the initial the current population. That's why bacteria split, right? How many bacteria are there at any given time? Well, count the number that there are and double it, because at least ideally they split. That's not what's happening here. Exponential growth, this would have a solution like something like y is equal to e to the 2x, which is all things that go up forever. What this differential equation is doing is telling you, okay, the rate of change of the population should be equal to the current population. So the more things there are, the faster things grow, right? The higher the current population, the higher the rate of change. That's what that differential equation is telling you. What that term is doing is saying, unless you get close to the number 100, and if you're close to the number 100, 100 minus y is very close to 0. So if you're not close to 100, your growth looks exponential. If you are close to 100, your growth looks like nothing. So this is a model that's used, this is probably the single most important model used in big parts of financial mathematics and biology. This is the carrying capacity model for population. You have exponential growth at the beginning. I can even zoom this in so it's even clearer. You have exponential growth at the beginning . So in this bit, this is like you drop a couple of bacteria inside of a petri dish and they grow exponentially. They're not competing for resources, they're reproducing without interfering with each other. They grow like an exponential curve. But as the population nears whatever your carrying capacity is, that growth slows down and they won't go above their carrying capacity. I don't need to tell you, again, the power of the differential equations approach to thinking about this is, I don't actually need to tell you the function that solves this. We can do this entirely just off our description of how the population should behave without ever solving it. In fact, this one, if you want to solve this one, you have to use partial fraction decomposition. Logs. Just wait. I have such things to show you. So anyway, so I guess the upshot here is that this is not technically part of this section, but I like hooking this up with things you're going to see in your classes. This is what's usually called a stable equilibrium. Stable here you can think of a pendulum, like a rod with a mass on top of it, actually has two stable points. So you have a solid rod with a mass on top. I can actually balance it straight up and down. That's an equilibrium. If it's perfectly balanced, it will stay there forever. But if one molecule touches that thing and it deviates at all from its initial point, it leaves. It's thrown away from the stable from the equilibrium point. So it's balanced perfectly and doesn't move, but if you tip it, it flips over until it's upside down. That one, if you deviate it slightly, it returns back to its initial point again. So This one is unstable because if you leave the equilibrium in either direction, you're thrown away from it. This one is stable because if you left the equilibrium position to the top and bottom, you return to it. These are important in all kinds of modeling problems to understand the difference between unstable and stable equilibria. Okay? All right, so here's our last exercise for the day. I'm going to give you a more interesting problem to think about. So let's look at so here's our final exercise for the day. Let's look at the differential equation y prime is equal to minus y plus the cosine of x. So we have a ways to go before we're going to have a general technique for solving that. And a week's worth of math probably before we can finish talking about, maybe more actually if we're going to do particular solutions to this thing. I'm not going to tell you the solution to that differential equation. We're just going to try to figure out what's going to happen just by looking at the slope field. So your task, and I'll start up in a couple minutes walking through here, is draw it. Somebody comes along and says, I got a physical problem. That's the model I came up with. The rate of change of the problem is dependent on not only whatever the current value of the function is, but there's also this forcing term or driving term in terms of x that's causing it to shift around. So your goal is make a slope field. 2 is nothing more than a guess. You're just building some character here. Guess at a solution curve. What should happen? Now you should be able to make the slope field using isoclines. That's straightforward to do. And then the guessing at a solution curve part is just to amuse myself. So I'll give you a couple minutes to think about what we should do, and then I will start doing it on the board, and you guys can tell me how to proceed. So we're going to use the isocline method. So what does the y prime equals 0 isocline declare?
Y cosine x.
Just y equals cosine x. Hopefully we can all still remember how to draw a cosine. All right, so here's a cosine. And then that's going to be all slope 0. And different slopes here. Y prime is equal to 1.
Y is cosine x minus 1.
Okay, so that would be 1 is equal to minus y plus the cosine of x, so y is equal to cosine of x minus 1. Okay, so cosine of x minus 1 is like cosine but shifted down by 1. Those are slope 1, right? This is the curve where y prime is 1. Oh, that's weird. Okay. And how about if I have slope negative 1? minus 1 is equal to minus y plus the cosine of x, which gets us y is equal to, no, yeah, y is cosine of x plus 1.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're negative 1 on that curve. And the further away I get, so I think, was it be reasonable to assume here that all of the isoclines are just cosine functions that are parallel to each other? And the further away we get from the middle, the steeper the slopes are. So if I get down here somewhere, so say I do a cosine that's down here, it's even more steeply oriented in the upward direction. And if I'm up here, it's even more negatively oriented. All right, so now, this is where your wild I'm going to draw the slope field. We'll see if we agree with what we've just done there. I think I did that correctly. If I didn't, you're always welcome to correct me here. So what I say, minus y plus cosine of x. And we'll go from 0 to say, what's the value here? About, I know, 10. And maybe from minus 3 to 3. All right, does that look, that slope field up there seem like a reasonable go at what we did here? I know it's harder to see the isoclines, but we have sort of an oscillating, sort of like the zero slope stuff is in the middle and there's sort of parallel cosines around it. What's gonna happen when I click the dots here? If I put, this is where the sort of, the delicacy of this sort of analysis comes in. If I give you an initial condition, say I put an initial condition right there, what happens?
It follows the one line until it reaches the 0, and then it gets kind of caught in a sine wave.
So it's going to go down.
It follows it goes down at a slope of 1, and then it kind of it keeps going at a slope of 1.
Okay.
It's between them kind of
Well,
balanced.
but remember the slopes are changing between them, right? Because in between now the slopes are a half instead, right?
So it kind of like slopes.
So it kind of comes in and lays out,
And then it like gets caught in the 1.
but then it gets sort of caught
And then it gets caught in the 0.
Caught in the 0.
Goes like across.
across the 0 line, but then back up.
Yeah, because you caught in the next one. Yeah.
So what do you think the answer is going to look like? What's the long-term asymptotic behavior of this problem?
A sine or cosine.
Oscillates.
It oscillates.
Well, let's see. Let's click some dots. So no matter where I put the initial condition, it sure looks like it's getting trapped inside that cosine wave, right? So let's see. We can actually really emphasize this by panning out a little bit further. So you can see that regardless of what your initial conditions were here, it certainly looks like the long-term behavior of this system is that it's all being trapped in this cosine function in the long term, right?
Is it caught in the 0 one, or is it a cosine
That is an
function?
excellent question. Is it?
It gets caught somewhere in between the two, right?
Because the 0 here, you can see, well, that's a good question. So it has to have, so one observation to make here is, do you know anything about where the peaks of that cosine happen?
Those are at the 0.
The
So
slopes,
sine.
yeah, the peaks of the cosine have to be trapped.
So it's in a sine function. Yeah, that's
So if you're gonna hit the top and bottom of that cycle, then you have to have slope 0 at the maximum minimum of what the asymptotic condition is. Okay, so now my last challenge for the day. Does this make sense, by the way? So when you're looking at slope fields,
Is it because is that where the integral of cosine is sine?
this is slightly more complicated than that because y itself is involved. So there's actually essentially what's happening here, in case you don't know, this why would you? The fact that this minus y is here means that there's what's called a transient term in the solution. There's a piece of this that's decaying exponentially that's absorbing the initial condition. So the fact that this is a minus sign means there's some kind of e to the minus x in the solution. It counts a lot at the beginning, but as time goes on, the e to the minus x goes to 0 and disappears. So this is basically, the solution to this is a sine function plus an exponential function that as time goes on goes away. This is the way circuits respond to things, for example, or oscillate, like anything that you study that's vibrating, right? If you strike something, you get an initial deformation of the object, that's subject to the strike, but eventually it settles into some sort of harmonic oscillation based on its whatever its intrinsic frequency is, right? A circuit will do this as well if you hit it with an impulse. So there's transient behavior and long-term behavior when you're studying these things that we'll also talk about when we get there. All right, last challenge of the day. Give me an interesting differential equation. Let's just let's just plot some rando one here.
Y prime equals e to
Y, yeah, it has to be y prime equals something though.
e to the x.
Oh God, e to the x times y.
Plus arctan x.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if the solver will do that. Let's see. No, but it didn't like that. Now here's a sloth. That was your response to that. Here, why don't we do? Why don't
My bad.
we can do arctan x if you. I don't know if it. The problem is I don't know if like how MATLAB wants to see arctangent. So let's just do e to the x times y.
It says work.
Let's see if that works. Did it do it?
Well, it's not up. It crashed.
Oh, it's thinking about it. It's it froze my computer. You guys came up with too interesting an example, and now it froze my computer. Okay, I'll post this tool. I'm sorry, I can't show you that. I will post this tool, which is called dfield. If you want to download MATLAB and start playing around with solving these things, the differential equations components of the course are going to be really nice if you have some kind of solver to go along with it. And Desmos and Math3D just do not do a good job. They'll produce slope fields, but their solution curves are awful.
Is it free?
It's all free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, MATLAB is free to students, and dfield is a free add-on to it. So, anyway, yeah. All right. So next time we will talk about separable differential equations, which is something most of you have seen before, and then next week we'll talk about integrating factors.